30 days without booze. As far as challenges go, not drinking isn't that hard because I'm not an alcoholic, which is another problem with when you stop drinking because you feel like you always have to qualify it. Like when you say you're on a date or you're out with your friends and everyone orders a drink and you're like, oh no thanks. They're like, what's wrong? What's happened to you? And I know that's true because I've been the person who's like, wait, why aren't you drinking? That's weird. But let me tell you why I have gone 30 days without alcohol. And this is not self-help, and if you are like a serious alcoholic, this video is probably not for you. But if you're like a casual, normal, millennial something who's into craft beer and you've justified your drinking because it's cool. You've got your fancy craft beer that you go and buy and get like little mixed six packs and you go, this is probably for you. And yes, it does have to do with cars, so it relates. But first, let me get my domo. Much better. Let's start with defining my drinking habits because without that you have no context for what I'm changing. So typically on a Friday or Saturday, I would have anywhere from 2 to 4 drinks. Now that could be mixed drinks, typically beers, and that means that I'm immediately going out on a Friday night, going to my friend's house or going to a bar and having those drinks. And that means I'm gonna be socializing, dancing, or just chilling out, watching a movie, whatever, and that's fine. But 2 to 4 drinks twice a week is kind of a lot. You start to realize like, okay, if I add up everything I'm drinking, is this unhealthy? And your body's telling you it's unhealthy because I typically wake up on a Saturday or Sunday with a mild hangover. Everyone's bodies react differently and some people just don't get hangovers. I'm jealous of that. But as I've gotten older, I've started to get that hangover more and more. Even if I've had like 2 drinks, I know the next morning that I've had 2 drinks. And outside of social situations, there's the occasional, oh, what a rough day. You get home from work, you crack open a beer. That's become a lot more acceptable in our generation. And this is why I think that's true. There's a lot more like fancy craft beer and funky bourbons and stuff out there. So it kind of feels like a hip, fun thing to do. But if you were to look back in like the mid 90s, anyone who is characterized on television or movies cracking open that daily beer when they finally get home from work, they sit in their armchair and open it up, they're probably drinking like a Bud Light or a Miller, and it would have been characterized as like white trash. It certainly wouldn't have been something that you'd be like, ooh, is that an IPA or a double buck? Like that's just not the case. But today, because everyone has their fancy craft beer, they're like, oh, I haven't tried that one yet. Let me have some. I think it's important to realize too that the beers you're drinking after work today, if you're into the craft beer thing, are a heck of a lot stronger than the beers your white trash dad would have been drinking in the mid 90s. A Bud Light is gonna have 3.5% alcohol, but your fancy IPA or that chocolate stout that you've been lusting after in your local liquor store finally started carrying, those are probably at like 6 to 8%. So every time you crack open that beer, your intake is quite a bit higher than even your dad when he was drinking his Bud. So other than just not wanting a hangover, what's the point of not drinking? There's a lot of reasons that I decided I wanted to see what would happen if I cut this. This isn't like some, I'm going vegan, no more meat ever again, meat is murder. No, this is just like, I wanted to kind of experiment and see like what would happen to my body and my emotional status if I just cut it out. And could I handle social situations without the social lubricant? So in the last 30 days, I have had 1 single drink, and I remember it because I was in New York at Alex Roy's apartment. It was a Peroni. That is the only drink I have had in the last 30 days. So if anyone's gonna call me on my bullshit and say, you had a drink, I saw you, I'm admitting it, that happened. But overall, I have stuck to this. The first thing I noticed was that I was more active in the gym. When you wake up on a Saturday morning after a night of drinking, the last thing you want to do is hit the gym, do a bunch of cardio and weightlifting. You've got those beer sweats and you just feel like shit, and there's nothing more just, like you just want to puke and it's awful. Even if you didn't have like a full-blown hangover, working out sucks after drinking. In 2 weeks, I could see a change in my body because 1, I was going to the gym more often, and 2, I think I was just taking in less junk because there's a lot of calories in beer, and when you're piling on an extra like 800-900 calories just in liquid, it adds up. But more importantly than fitness, honestly, I think is your attitude. And I definitely have depression, and it's something that I work through on a seasonal and daily basis. So what would happen if I just didn't have alcohol? Now, alcohol is really tempting because it feels like the solution to your problem when you're feeling really down. It kind of gets you out of your own head, it maybe relaxes you, but long term, it really just makes your depression worse. And now you have a vice to rely on, and you're gonna use it. So immediately I've noticed that I've had more motivation than I did before. And that means even just making videos. You've seen me like making way more videos lately, and I think it's honestly because I've been drinking less. I typically make my videos on the weekends, so if I'm drinking on the weekends but also need to be filming on the weekends, it gets really tricky to strike that balance. Also to be just motivated to do it, because who the hell wants to be like bummed out or drunk on camera? Like, I certainly don't want to have a beer in me when I'm on this. And during a live stream, fine, it's just me and Eddie shooting the shit with a couple of beers, and that's great. But like, if I've got to shoot something serious and I need to be like coherent and together and tell a story, it's a lot harder to do even after 1 or 2 drinks. But the biggest thing I was worried about was social situations. How do you go into a party or an activity or an event where everyone else is drinking and you're not? And honestly, I feel like I should get some recovering alcoholic friends just to teach me like how to have fun on weekend nights without alcohol. So I'll give you an example. The other night I went to a party, and the second I walked in, I saw my friend. I didn't know anybody else at this party, and he hands me a drink. He hands me a gin and tonic. And I almost told him, no thanks, but it was already poured, and I just didn't want to go through the thing of like, I'm not drinking. Because to be honest, it sounds pretentious as fuck. You go and you're like, oh, sorry, no, I'm not drinking. It's kind of like, oh, I don't eat carbs. Like, fuck off. Like, you don't have to tell me, just don't eat it. So I walked around and I held my drink. And what I've been doing lately, like when it's on my own accord and I have control over it, I just get like a spicy water or a seltzer. And that kind of satiates that like paced drinking. It's just like drinking a soda or something. You just kind of, you know, you're not gonna like chug a soda, that's disgusting, and you're gonna burp like a gross person. So this helps me like still have something in my hand, something to do. The same way a lot of people have a hard time quitting smoking is like, it's that fidget thing. It's like the ritual of holding a cigarette. And then when they don't have it, suddenly it's like, oh my, like what am I doing with my hands? Do I do this? Is this how I hold myself? Is this what I do with my hands? But I'm also trying to learn how to be like on a dance floor and do normal things that I would do as a sober person. Those are learned experiences, and I think I need to still get used to that. I'm not saying that I'm not ever gonna drink again. I'm just saying that like, I would like to be able to go into what would normally be considered to me awkward social situations without alcohol and prosper. But now let's talk about cars, because alcohol and cars are a really bad mixture. And yes, the legal limit in the United States in most places is 0.08. But like, I don't think that at 0.09, you're suddenly like more dangerous. Obviously that number is based off of statistical data that would say like, okay, people who hit this threshold, this is like the safe threshold where anything over this, we see like this big uptick in accidents or something. Like, one would hope that's what it's based on. I'm actually not sure. But at 0.08, you're still actually pretty drunk. That's gotta be at least like 2 or 3 drinks for me, and I'm 135 pounds. So for someone who's like larger than me and can handle more alcohol, like imagine like 4, 5, 6 drinks. I don't know, that seems kind of impossible, but let's say like 4 or 5, right? I don't think people should be driving at that level, and here's the deal. I'm not saying you can't. I just think that like I would prefer not to. And I hate that feeling of having like 2 drinks, hanging out for a while, getting in my car and driving home and thinking, huh, I wonder what my BIC really is. And just to say you had 2 beers, you don't know if those beers might have been like 6 to 8%. Maybe those beers were a lot stronger than you thought. So suddenly you take a right on red, you're getting pulled over, and your night just turned into a DUI. Now, I'm pretty paranoid to begin with, so I'm not saying that I'm out driving drunk and hoping I don't get pulled over. But what I am saying is that, how do you know if you don't know? If you haven't done a breathalyzer, you don't know what your BIC is. So not drinking has actually made my life a lot easier, because I go out, I get in my car, I drive home, and as I'm driving, I still kind of like instinctively have that twinge of like, ooh, wait a minute, how much did I drink? And then I'm like, nothing, I don't drink. Kind of like wondering, hey, do I have an STD? And then you're like, wait a minute, I'm a virgin. But actually, I do have some good STD stories that revolve around cars. In fact, an RWB Porsche prevented me from getting gonorrhea once. But the next day is also something to consider, because driving hungover is pretty awful too. And not just because of the motion sickness and like the sounds and everything like that, especially if you're in like a straight pipe loud car, but your coordination, your whole just like everything is a little off, and it's not that enjoyable to drive that way. And I realized last year, I was driving my 911 like hungover 80% of the time, because I would only drive the car on Sundays to car shows or do weird little things after like a hard Saturday night. And oh, that car is just not enjoyable to drive after a night of drinking, because it reeks of fuel, it's loud, it's visceral, everything's rattling and shaking, and it's just like, that's not a hangover car. Like, you're honestly just asking, it's a puke machine. It's a fucking puke machine. My drinking's never been like an issue. I've never blacked out. I've never done anything that I've regretted, well, mostly. But when you drink and you drink regularly and socially, you tend to surround yourself with other people who do the same. And at the risk of sounding too preachy, some people are just assholes when they drink, and it really sucks to be around those people. Trust me, I've dated them. One of my ex-boyfriends woke up in a closed CVS in Kenmore Square in the ventilation duct, left the store, broke out of it nude, went back to wherever he was sleeping that night, and had to pick up his stuff at the Boston police station. So, like, that's not a classy night of drinking. And if you find yourself in those situations where you hurt people or act like an asshole or just don't remember stuff you did, those are good indications that you need to like figure out your shit, because alcohol is probably not for you. But for the rest of us, if you're just like a normal casual drinker, think about like, is this something I want to cut back on? For me, like, I love food, so if I'm in this for fitness, it's easier for me to cut booze than it is for me to like cut Ben and Jerry's. So that's my story. Trying to be healthy, trying to be fit, trying to be happy, and I'm trying to bring you guys more killer content. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive.